In this presentation, we have a little bit provocative title of why your code doesn't reproduce, because we are betting it won't. Because there's very often some problems with reproducibility, even if you try to do everything right. And this based on us running this journal for about 6 years now, where we are doing computational reproducibility checks for all articles that we publish in the journal Metapsychology. Can switch to the next slide, please. And today we're going to talk about this computational reproducibility assessment we do at Metapsychology. And based on that, we will go through some common errors in computational reproducibility that we have seen. And I think they are quite interesting to look at, because these are kind of the best case scenarios. A lot of times when we look at computational reproducibility problems in the literature, we see a lot of the worst case scenarios, because these cases when there are big problems like the one sick scandal and similar things, they're brought up and they're getting big news flash and everything on when things are just wreaking havoc. But it's very interesting to see how things look like when we know that we have authors who are very much interested in reproducibility and are interested in open science and trying their best or submitting to a journal. So that's kind of interesting to see the best case scenarios. And hopefully we can, based on our experience, start to formulate some kind of best practices for reproducible analysis, which we'll also discuss. And at the end of the presentation, we will have a general discussion on questions and answers. And the reason we are caring about this to begin is that we believe that transparency is a way out of the replication crisis. That's why I got interested in this from the beginning. And the thing is that transparency is amazing. We are starting getting more open methods and open code and people sharing data and sharing analysis. But transparency only allows assessing reliability research findings. Somebody also has to do it. And to this day, much focus has been given to replication. That is when we do the same analysis on new data, or robustness. That is when we do new analysis on the same data. But less attention has been given to the most basic form things, keeping data analysis reporting free from errors. Yeah, sorry, did someone had? No. Okay. And this is the more boring, mundane stuff, but we think that this is really important to actually get these parts right, because if we don't get the basics right, then we can't expect anything else. It's kind of like downstream's problem. If we don't have basic reproducibility, then there's no point in doing a robustness check, and there's no point in going out and doing replications. And I think that I see a lot of ways in the literature where people are going about and doing replications and collecting new data. It's very costly and spending hours and hours and lots of money on this, when actually the problem is much more simpler and could have been solved by just doing a reproducibility check. So that is kind of weird that computational reproducibility checks are still rare. They're happening in, starting to get more traction. It's being done in some journals in economy, and I think there's at least one journal in political science doing them, but they are still very rare in general. And what we're doing at Metapsychology is that we founded a journal in 2017 based on the idea that a lot of the changes and the movement that was done in the replication crisis and the open science movement in psychology, and we felt that we needed a new journal. We need a journal that could be like an experimental place where we could try new things. Because I have very much respect for people who are editors at large journals that handles several hundred papers a year. It's hard to change those behemoths of science. So it's much easier to reinvent the journal and start a new journal where we can experiment with things. Because, if we mess up at the start at least, then we maybe mess things up for 10 papers and we can fix it. So that's why we started this. And because of this ambition, we are pioneering in this area of openness and transparency, and we ranked #1 on the top factor, the transparency and openness factor on that Center for Open Science are when they're reviewing journals. And we do this by being a community-run journal. We are not owned by any society. We're owned by our own editorial board, and we rely a lot on the community. And we don't have any APCs. We're a diamond open access journal. That was one of the most important things. It shouldn't cost anything to read what we publish, and it should cost anything to publish. And we're publishing anything meta in psychology. It could be reviews, meta-analysis, commentaries, replications. And what we'll focus on for this talk is our 5 years experience with computational reproducibility at metapsychology. And I can just say that when we started this, we started on the idea that we should do it for free and it should have 0 cost, and we should be able to do that. And we managed to do that for the first couple of years, to run it completely free, just based on the community shipping in and crowdsourcing. So it was very important for us to see that that can be done. Computational reproducibility checks can be done in similar ways to how peer review is done. However, we quickly find out that it's much better to have them done in-house by someone who is an expert on it. And unfortunately, we got a grant from Swedish Research Council to do these kind of reproducibility checks along with ordinary copy editing. And I'm happy to say that about a little while ago, we got it renewed for another 3 years. So we are now funded to be able to do these reproducibility checks. Yes.
Okay. I will be talking more about the entire process of how we do the checks and how some things changed throughout the years, and maybe Rickard can explain more about the things that happened before I came to work. A bit of an overview. So since 2017 until 2022, there were 47 articles reproduced, and we mean any article that had some kind of data or analysis was reproduced. So we do reproducibility checks on anything that needs to be reproduced. We don't reproduce commentaries or things like that. We started gathering data and statistics on everything that happened since 2017, but since the process changed, we don't really have good documentation on the first years. So I will mostly talk about the 2022 and common errors that came from this, but are also very similar to previous years. So in 2022, there were 13 articles that needed to be reproduced, and out of those, the ones that we managed to reproduce without any errors were 2. But even with that, there was one of them that was a simulation study. And even though it didn't have any errors, we had to change the code to run it with fewer iterations to be able to run it in reasonable amount of time. Then we had 2 types of errors. The first one is a category of errors in code, and we had 8 of those. And these happen to be almost easy to fix, simple errors, because like Rickard said, we already have a sample of people who come eager to follow open science practices and do a good job with the analysis. And we also have a good rapport with the authors and can fix things along the way. And yet still some things happen more often than not. So some of these are missing library calls or just problems knitting the reports and other issues. We also have errors in reported results. We had 6 papers with those issues, and some of the examples are like a wrong sample size or mean, or a plot that looks a bit different, or just common copy-paste errors. For the process, in the beginning, it was not as standardized on how to do the reproducibility checks, and the reports that were done were more extensive, and I think that's what Rickard, you said. But as the years went by, this process, we tried to make as easy as possible and as streamlined and standardized. So in 2021, I think, or 2020, the reproducibility checklist was introduced. And this is just a guideline on what the assessor should look for when they do a reproducibility check on a paper. So we see if the data is fitting, and we can actually do the analysis and reproduce it based on the data that they provided. If it's archive ready, and then we check in the code if we can find a code for everything that was in the papers, and we try to run it. And then we comment on whether there were some requirements that we could not find or something that was missing that prevented us from running the code. Then we state our computer environment, which is a very important thing because we realize that at some point there's a question if anything can be reproducible forever, because sometimes there are problems between different operating systems. So it can be reproduced on Windows, it cannot be reproduced on a Mac. So we try to state where, which environment we have used to reproduce the results to verify that at least once we have managed to get the results. But we cannot really state that this is fully reproducible and will always be. And there are other issues like code rot that can happen throughout the years that might cause this issue, and that it might not be reproducible in the future. But we make sure that the paper that we have received and the results that are in paper, at least once they were fully reproduced. Then we go on to the paper side and we look if we can compare to the code output, the paper outputs, and what they have written to see that these match. And then we state if there was a full reproduction or a reproduction with minor issues. And then we usually get back to the authors to fix the things if they're missing packages or anything else, to make sure that this works before it gets published. And based on these reproducibility assessments, we have found some common errors. And I should state maybe that I am doing most of the reproducibility checks, but this is still on a voluntary basis. We do have other people chipping in, so there are people helping out with reproducibility checks. And some of the common errors here we will talk about, and then also some of the practices that we thought would not only fix this, but maybe help us debug faster and save time, because computational reproducibility assessments are really time consuming. So we're trying to make this process as streamlined as possible for us and the authors as well. So the most common errors that we have encountered were basically renaming the files in between steps, or uploading them to OSF, or changing something and then not keeping it in the analysis. Some of the functions that were not working as they should, like deprecated functions, and then hard coding file paths or using older software versions that don't change the output later on. So the first one is, it's very common and it's quite problematic. I should state that most of the analyses that we have had published were done in R. Some were done in Jamovi. We didn't have many in Python. So maybe some of these issues also pertain to the type of software that people use. And we also see that functions not working might be one of the most common things in R. It's often something that might be because there's a missing or an outdated dependency. They don't name the packages that they have used. They use undefined or out of scope variables. They don't correctly put the arguments or leave them out when they send in. And then some of the functions just stop working because the packages are no longer maintained. Another common issue, I think this one is a very easy fix, but if we're trying to get reproducibility on like a point and run level, then this is often a problem because we have to go through the code and then change all of the paths into relative paths. So hard coding causes this issue. This is very easy to fix, but it is something to keep in mind that for a code to run seamlessly, it should not be done. Software versions, this is another thing that maybe only is a problem in R, but it is a problem that not stating which version of the software was used can cause troubles while reproducing. And then on the other hand, some packages might stop being maintained and then we can no longer retrieve them. This also ties to the containers and version control packages that I will talk about later. But these are mostly the problems of not stating which dependencies were used in the software. So these are the most common errors when it comes to code. And then we also have some more common errors in the non-reproducible results when it comes to reports and why they differ from the code. So what we found was copy-paste errors, wrong roundings, and one of the problems is if there are any analyses that are simulation-based. So I would say this is a bigger problem if they bootstrap, use bootstrapping for anything, that they don't set seed, and then rerunning these analyses will change the numbers. And in that case, not much can be done to fix this because we cannot go back. When it comes to simulating data sets, this is less often a problem, but it does happen. I guess the problems with simulations are the biggest issues, but if the code is there, I would say that maybe it's not, so if it doesn't change the results and the meaning of the results, it's not such a big of a problem. Then we have wrong roundings and copy-paste errors. These are very common to just, when the transfer happens, that there are mistakes, and these can be also easily fixed, but it is still something that needs to be fixed when it can be done correctly from the start. And based on these, we have started thinking of what would be the best ways to clean this up. Most of the things that we present come from computer science and how they deal with code. But first of all, it's importance of structure and making sure that the projects are easy to follow, that allow using relative paths when we use code, and that these projects can be easily shared and managed by other people, especially if someone is reproducing the code. I don't want to know every single thing about the code to be able to reproduce it. It should be something that I can understand from reading documentation and then just running the code. So having hierarchical project structure, and there is some effort into making data structure and guidelines for this that are similar to computer science, but also in psychology, which I think can be used in other research areas as well. File naming conventions, this is a very, like an issue that causes much more trouble than it should because it takes a lot of time. We had one of the papers where one of the files was named with an underscore or like a space in between, and I could not load it in, and I didn't know what was wrong with it because when I just look at it with my eyes, it seems fine. And then I spent so much time trying to understand why this cannot be loaded in. And then I realized that that's because it's missing a space in the name, in the code. These are the things that just take time. It breaks code. You don't know why. And it's something so easy to fix if you keep consistent in how you capitalize the names, how you make them clear that you know what the names refer to. And if there are any chronologies in the way that you have your scripts or analyses that should be run, or the way that the data sets are set, so they follow some kind of order and structure. Another good way of making sure that things don't get lost in the transfer between the code and the results is to use markdowns and basically compiling the reports along with the code and then extracting the data so it doesn't change when you move to another word processing file. I think this is also something that depends on the journals and what they allow, but if it's something that can be a standard, then it makes it easier and allows reproducibility. Finally, one thing, well, not finally, but one thing that is very important, always missing, and apparently very hard to get people to write correctly are README files and codebook files. And I can see why, because these take time and can be very exhausting to write. But this is the most crucial part because then it allows me to understand how I should run the analyses, what I need to run the analyses, and then also what the variables are, what they mean, what the data set means. Which speeds up the process. It also helps debug if something happens in the meantime. So some of the things that the README files should have are computing environment, package versions, project descriptions, how to install packages. On the other hand, code books, and even in R, there are packages that allow you to create a code book from your data to speed this process up and make it easier for the authors. And finally, the containerization part is something that would actually allow us to have reproducibility that could last longer, but this might be something that is too much to ask from the authors who usually might not be well versed in using containers. There is a way that they try to create containers and version control through using R packages, but these seem to create more problems than they help, because they rely on the package version that existed, and then some of those package versions don't exist on CRAN. And if you cannot pull them from CRAN, it doesn't matter that you have a package version. And then it breaks the whole thing. And then it makes it even harder to debug than if we didn't have it at all. So some of the things that are helpful make your life miserable. But maybe using Docker or CodeOcean types of softwares might be the way to go. Along with R, we also have some authors that have submitted in point-and-click alternatives like Jasper, Jamovi. This still can be a reproducible analysis if you save all the files with the analysis and how you edited the data in a transparent way. And if you just write things on paper, step by step what you did, it's still more reproducible than just sending like an SPSS file. So there are ways to make analysis reproducible even if you don't write code. And one thing that could help now that we have ChatGPT is to have help in shortening the time of creating documents. And I think this is a very useful tool to have, because it can help you draft documents, it can help you draft README files, any kind of other documentation, test out the code, annotate the code, comment it out on what belongs to what analysis, what dependencies it should be. ChatGPT can help with all of this and help you save time on actually making proper documentation that you can send in together with the code. And this is all we had for now, and we are hoping to hear comments and maybe some suggestions on how to further improve the process. Thank you.